name is Mark Stephen Wade, and I am an avid photographer, and I hope you are too. And if you're not, come along with me and let's make it happen. Okay, today we're going to talk about focus. Now, there are times where you're going to want to use autofocus, and there are times when you're going to want to use manual focus. And we're going to talk a little bit about when those times are going to happen. Now, focus, I want to say this. Camera companies have had good autofocus features for a very long time. But I will say this, Sony has kicked everybody into high gear, along with Canon, as far as getting fast focus, concentrating on the human face, the human eye, and that's very important. When you're making portraits, you want to make sure that that eye is in focus. And Sony and Canon and now even Nikon have been getting pushed toward that direction. And it's great if you're doing a wedding, having eye focus is a feature in your camera is great. But why would I ever use manual focus? That's a good question. Let's say you get an older camera. Let's say you're starting out. And you get an older camera. And you start using it, or maybe you have a one-off lens or something, right? And you start using it, and you're finding out that, and this is always what you do before you go make portraits of somebody or something, an animal or something, you make sure that that thing works right. Your camera and your lens are working together to get the shot. And otherwise, you may find out, go test on your friend or test on your wife or your girlfriend or your husband or boyfriend or whatever, whoever is in your life. Make them your subject. They're going to get tired of it, but it's really important to understand that your camera gear is working correctly. And if you're taking autofocus shots and then you start looking at them and you're noticing that the eye just really isn't in focus like it should be, sometimes that happens because the gear just isn't that fast, or maybe you're just maybe your shutter speed wasn't right or whatever, and we talked about all those things. Maybe your shutter speed needs to be a little bit faster, which kind of brings its own problems because now you're going to have a wider aperture, and now things are going to be less in focus. So these things can be problematic, but you need to test it and you need to practice. Don't listen to me and think you can just go do something. You need to practice. It's all on you. It's not on me. Okay? So just practice and you'll get it. You'll get it. Okay, so when would I use autofocus? Well, again, when you have a camera, and I don't think I've used this one to do weddings or anything. But if you have a camera that has eye detection, face detection, you just go into your menu and find it. I'm not going to tell you how to do that. You just have to learn your menu. If you have Sony menu and you hate it, sorry, that's the way it works. Sony menus, whatever. I don't care. They're all different, right? I don't think Sony menus are that bad. You just have to learn them. You have to get accustomed to the gear that you're using, and you have to invest your time and not complain about it. Just be glad you got this great gear. So why would I use autofocus? Well, again, if I know that the autofocus is working correctly, then I would do it, right? So basically, like this lens itself has an autofocus manual focus switch on it. The camera body, some camera bodies, especially the old Nikons, have autofocus switches on them, and you need to make sure all that stuff is working correctly. This has an autofocus button in the back, which works great, right? If you want to use autofocus, you push the button, but the autofocus function needs to be set on this lens for it to work. Now, why would I ever want to use manual focus if I've got autofocus? That's the big question. Well, there are several different scenarios that will happen. One of them is if you are, if there's a noisy background, or say there are faces behind you, behind the subject. If there are faces behind the subject, you might have issues finding, your camera might have issues finding focus. It might want to wander off. And if your focus point is wandering off during a critical shot, you might miss the shot. So it's important to understand your camera. If it doesn't find, for me, I always set my focus point to the center and I put my subject in the center. Okay, then if I want to crop it and make it look different later, then I'll do that. That's what I do. Now, I know that newer cameras are really good about detecting your subject, even in a room full of people. Cameras I have don't do that. So, as long as I can get that subject in the center, I'm usually pretty good. But there are times, like say the lighting has come down. The lighting isn't good. Well, what do I want to do? I want to kick this thing out of autofocus into manual focus. And then I'm actually manually focusing on that person's face. And there are different things that assist with your focus, like peaking, like a peaking, not zebras, but peaking. And essentially, once the contrast becomes strong enough, you'll get like a yellow outline or an orange or whatever, red, whatever color you want to pick. And that will really help you in darker situations. You almost always have to do it with older cameras because when there's not much light there, there's not a whole lot for the camera to understand what you want in focus. So a lot of times, especially when I'm shooting video, almost always I'm shooting manual focus. So it's important to understand manual focus, and it's important to practice manual focus. And it's because when you need to do it, you better know how to do it. Otherwise, you're gonna get frustrated. And I'm not talking about professionally. I'm talking about just to make good photographs. You should know how to use your manual focus. I use it probably 50% of the time. And I've started doing astrophotography. You better know how to use manual focus for astrophotography. And so I just want to encourage you to learn it. And don't worry about putting the time into it that it takes. Just do it. Once you've done it, then it's part of all of your skill stack. And so just learn it, practice it, and figure out when your camera needs to be in manual focus, and get into that mode. Okay, wow, that was weird. So I was checking this video, and it was cut off at the end. Now that happens, right? That happens with gear sometimes, and I'm gonna have to figure out what that was. So I'm just gonna finish it. I'm gonna finish it up now. But a lot of times I will use autofocus. I've learned how to use it as efficiently as I can. Now, when we start getting into like bird photography and things like that, if you want to do bird photography, we'll cover some of that. So I just, this is weird. I'm wearing a different shirt than what we started with. Anyway, thank you for listening. And I hope you become an avid photographer. It really is so satisfying to be able to build good photographs, even if it's just for your family. And I'm just going to harp on that idea. Anyway, thank you again for listening. Hope to see you on the next one.